welcome to a new episode of Nonstop Nick Hill. Welcome to our first day here in Zanzibar. Yesterday we did a brief overview of Stone Town where we just walked through, just got some first impressions, but we really didn't delve deep. It's really getting hot here, even though it's maybe 10:30 in the morning. But we're starting our day here in Zanzibar talking about an issue, and that is slavery. I know we often talk about the transatlantic slave trade, and that was something we talked about heavily in Senegal, but that was only one of 4 slave trades going on in the world during this time. We had the transatlantic slave trade, we had the trans-Saharan slave trade, which we talked about in Mauritania, and then we had the Red Sea slave trade, which took place between the African coast and Yemen and parts of the Middle East. And then we had the Indian Ocean slave trade, which was conducted by the Arabs, the Indians, the Europeans, as well as powerful African tribes, all exploiting the most vulnerable of people whose settlements were raided, whose people were enslaved, and who were then sold and bought along the Indian Ocean coast. In North America, it was primarily tobacco which fueled the need for labor and the need for additional labor from Africa. However, here in Zanzibar, it was the cultivation of cloves and other spices which necessitated such a demand for cheap labor. I'm going to try to walk and talk because these streets are so iconic. But as we were talking about the slave trade, I just want to follow up on that a little bit more. There was such a range of populations who were actively engaged in that trade to make it as successful as it was for those amount of centuries. Walking through Zanzibar's Stone Town, I'm having so much trouble figuring out exactly how to structure this vlog because there's just so much to talk about. Every turn you make tells literally a different story, and then that story is actually comprised of 4 or 5 stories because everybody's contributing to it from their own lands, from their own cultural heritage, and so it makes it really hard to succinctly synthesize exactly what's going on here. But I'm going to try to tackle it in little bits. And so I started trying to talk about the Indian Ocean slave trade because that's the reason that Zanzibar became what it is today. Before the first Europeans, who were the Portuguese, arrived here in the early 1500s, Zanzibar was primarily inhabited by Gulf Arabs and Persians who had intermarried with the local Swahili people. However, the Portuguese didn't just pass through this area. They recognized exactly how strategic it was, the wealth that was concentrated here, and they knew that if they needed to beat the other European powers for access to India and its wealth, they needed to have a permanent presence here. The Portuguese set up trade settlements along this so-called Swahili coast in order to tax the residents, who were primarily Muslims of mixed Persian, African, Arab ancestry. And so Zanzibar actually appears in Arabic and Persian as Zanzibar. Zinj meaning black in Persian, and Bar meaning the coast. So literally the black coast. In the 1500s, Vasco da Gama arrived and he brought news of the settlement back home to Portugal, encouraging the Portuguese crown to set up a settlement here on the Indian Ocean coast. And that's why we have Mozambique as a Portuguese colony, still speaking Portuguese today. However, their reign did not last as long here off the coast of Tanzania. They only ruled this area for 2 centuries. During this time, the Portuguese heavily taxed the wealthy, mostly Muslim traders here in Zanzibar, and they didn't like that, naturally. And so they appealed to the Sultan of Oman, who had strong religious and cultural ties to these traders, to intervene and get rid of the Portuguese. And that's exactly what Oman did. They defeated the Portuguese. Obviously, that's not where the story ends. Although the Omanis were able to, directly or indirectly, control this part of East Africa up until the mid-1900s, they weren't the sole powers operating and vying for control of this coast. The Omani Sultanate faced constant attack by the British, the Germans, as well as other rival African powers seeking control of the trade and profits of Zanzibar. In the mid-19th century, that's the mid-1800s, there was a power vacuum in the Omani Sultanate, and Zanzibar fell vulnerable to being captured by the British. One thorny subject for the British during this time was the slave trade. They tried to put so much pressure on the Omanis to stop the slave trade. And although the trade of slaves legally ended in the 1870s, it wasn't actually abolished in practice because many people still kept their slaves in their homes. It was only the buying and selling which had stopped. Now, given how ruthless the British were in their colonialism around the world during the same time, and how their racial systems of discrimination still continued, my theory is that they were against the profits which the Arabs, the Indians, and others operating here in Zanzibar were making due to slave labor, when at the same time the British could no longer profit off of slavery on their own lands. They felt it was unfair. The Gulf Arabs and Persians who first immigrated here due to the trade winds, because the winds from that part of the world would naturally bring you to this island off the coast of Africa. They found themselves here and they realized it would be a wonderful strategic place to settle. They not only settled in their trade communities, but they also intermarried with local African people, and that gave birth to the Swahili culture, which, despite giving birth to a new culture here off the east coast of Africa, these early Arab and Persian traders still maintained strong connections to their homelands through trade. These traders had a couple centuries of their fun and profits before the Europeans caught notice for it. As a British protectorate, the British promised the Omanis that they would help them protect their coastline from other European powers in exchange for the Omani Sultanate giving up some of their own powers internally, as well as being able to tax them. And so the Swahili traders here were taxed twice. They were taxed, one, by the Omanis, and second, the Omanis were then being taxed again by the British. As the British and Arabs kept engaging in this tug of war for power over different sort of rights here in Zanzibar, there was one population which was suffering under both. We can call this population the Swahili population, or the black Swahili population, who have become the actual people of Zanzibar. This native population, or the Swahili population, had then been subjugated under the imperialist policies of so many different people. They were subjugated under the Omanis, they were subjugated under the Europeans, they were subjugated under the privileged status of the Indian traders who kept the wealth for themselves. And that's why we have today's Zanzibar government, known as the Revolutionary Government of Zanzibar. It was a time of nationalism. The 1960s, many of these modern African states that we know today, Tanzania, Kenya, Mozambique, were all gaining independence from their European powers. And the people of Zanzibar felt that they had no real connection to Tanzania itself on the mainland. They had no connection to Europe. They had no connection to their Omani imperialists. They had their own identity and they wanted their own sovereignty. The Swahili population acknowledged that though they might not have had all the resources or all the institutional power or generational wealth that the other groups had, they had one thing, and that was the numbers. Arabs were powerful, but they were small in number. The Indians were wealthy, but they were small in number. And if you think that today's Zanzibar is such a multicultural, multi-ethnic place, it was even more so before this revolution. However, there needed to be a redistribution of power and wealth in the society, and that could not have been ignored. And so, after the revolution, when the native Swahili people of the island recaptured control over their society and their government, we saw a displacement of many of the elites away from the island. Many of the Arabs and Indians who were powerful and wealthy ended up going to the Tanzanian mainland, and that's a lot of what we saw in Dar es Salaam today, those big constructions in the early 20th century by Indian business people. And many of the Arabs did the same thing, either went back to the mainland or went back to the Gulf. And this is a part of why so many of those buildings, which had previously belonged to the Arab and Indian elites in Stone Town, now lay in ruin. Because after the revolution in the 1960s, there weren't enough people who had the material wealth in order to promote their upkeep. And today, given Stone Town's status as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, exactly for this multicultural mix of Indian, Arab, Persian, and Swahili architecture, mixed with the churches, the columns, and the European influences on this town, efforts are being made to preserve the buildings and structures exactly as they once were. If you're planning on renovating any of the protected buildings here, they must be redone in a way which mirrors the old techniques and aesthetics as much as possible. For example, certain motifs would be reserved for Hindu establishments, other for Muslim establishments. Some motifs would be representative of Hindu stores versus Hindu residences. Balconies would also be extremely telling, because open balconies would be typical of Hindu buildings, whereas closed off balconies, in order to allow for a private space for families, it would be indicative of Islamic constructions. It becomes so easy to go down a rabbit hole here of this is a Hindu business, this is a Hindu residence, this is a Sunni business, this is a Bohra residence, this is a Shia residence, this is a this, that. But taking it all in together and seeing them all side by side in coexistence, all a part of one building, one neighborhood, one city, that's exactly what the Zanzibar experience is all about. Hello everyone. So after I had lunch at Luqman's Biryani, had some biryani, and now I decided to leave the touristy area of Stone Town to come out to a market because I wanted to buy some local clothes. It rained a ton this afternoon, and right after the rain ended, people are literally sweeping the rainwater in puddles off the street. At one point, people are literally just wading through the puddles. Good thing is most people here are wearing flip-flops, so they can do that, but like my boots just got completely destroyed and inundated by the waters. But I wanted to get out of the tourist area of Stone Town into where people are buying their like daily necessities, daily clothes, daily household items, cosmetics, toiletries, and a lot of abayas. Here, pretty much every store is selling abaya. I was searching one end of the market for stores selling men's clothes. There were maybe a couple, 2 or 3 stores, but not a lot. Couldn't exactly find exactly what I wanted at the price that I wanted. So I asked one of the storekeepers exactly where I can find more men's clothes. He pointed me a certain direction, so I'm trying to head that direction while dodging puddles, while dodging people, and trying to stay sane. I must be going in the right direction because I've at least found more stores selling Western menswear, a couple of stores here and there selling some of the traditional Omani outfits, such as these behind me. It looks like the rain is starting again, so I'm going to try to pop into one of these stores and see what they have. After checking in to a couple of stores now, I know exactly what things should cost and the quality and what I should be looking for in one of these Omani thobes. So at least I have a bit more bargaining leverage there. But it's all about the color that I want, something that I feel is actually wearable in other countries and at a price that doesn't feel like it's a complete investment. Because, you know, I can't carry everything I can buy. My bags are already full as it is, but I did save some space exactly for one of these because I know they're so useful. This is all just me saying that I still haven't found anything. You think it would be so easy, but it's really complex. So many different kind of factors, and then the more you learn, the more picky you get, and the more options you see, the more picky you get. If you just saw one, you would have just taken it. But I'm also not willing to pay too much for it, so that's another added factor. So I've literally spent all of the late afternoon walking around in circles trying to look for this one shop, which I entered earlier into the afternoon, and they had the best price, best item. I figured it might be closed, and that's why I wasn't able to find the store, but finally, for some reason, I walked by it, I recognized the shop owner, and they were just about to close. I have my Omani impersonator outfit in hand, and I'll probably be wearing it at some point over the next couple months for sure. Right now, just waiting for Vivek. We've decided on some dinner plans. We'll see if those end up being confirmed or not. But for now, just have to wait a couple extra minutes and see if those plans go through. If not, we'll find something else for dinner. But it's been a fun day. I know it's a lot of pressure trying to cover everything about the history or what's going on here in Zanzibar. And I can't do that. I don't have all the resources for that. I can't remember everything. I don't know everything in the first place. I'm trying to just relieve myself of that burden to cover everything, be everything, make this vlog everything it can be for Zanzibar, because that's so much material. But I hope you enjoyed at least a little taste of the city today. I'm hoping to find more little spots that we can visit that are not stone towns, that are not the touristy areas. Like the market we did today, that was one little step, but it feels completely different from the heart of touristy Zanzibar here in Stone Town. And I can't cover all the history, all the facts, and do it all justice, but I'll try to drop something here and there. Everything else, you can do your research on your own, and this will be a beautiful starting point. So with that, take care. I hope you enjoyed today's vlog, and I hope you look forward to more moments from Zanzibar. Bye, everyone.